Welcome to video 2, Setting Up a Virtual Lab. The usage of a virtual lab is standard practice for the safe analysis and detonation of malware. A virtual lab is basically one or more virtual machines which have been set up for safe malware analysis. In case you're unfamiliar with these, virtual machines are basically simulations of physical computers. However, virtual machines do offer a number of advantages over physical computers. First, you can easily run a variety of operating systems and operating system versions on virtual machines. For instance, if I have a Windows device or a Mac device, I can easily put a Linux, Ubuntu, or another operating system on my own device. Secondly, you can take snapshots and use these to bring the virtual machine to a previous state very much more quickly than you would be able to do on a physical device. And finally, it is pretty easy to parallelize. You can easily run several VMs on the same device. To set up a virtual lab, we are going to take the following steps. First, download and install a hypervisor, which is an administrative software for virtual machines. Secondly, download a virtual image, which is like a template for a virtual machine instance. Then run the virtual machine, and finally configure it for safe malware analysis and detonation. Let me show you how to set up a basic virtual lab. So I'm going to go online and I'm going to download VirtualBox. VirtualBox is a hypervisor, which is basically something that manages your virtual machines. It's kind of like an administrative console. Since I'm on a Mac host, I'm going to download the version for OS X. I'm going to download it. I'm going to speed up through this process. I'm going to install it. And then once we have it, I'm going to go ahead and set up a guest, a virtual machine. Okay, so this is now set up, and you can see I have some virtual machines already installed. Next, I'm going to download a Windows virtual machine. So I'm going to type in Windows VM online and pick the second link, and then I'm going to pick Windows 10 64 bits for VirtualBox, and also note the password. We'll be using it later. And the reason I use 64 bits is because most of the current malware is designed for 64 bits, and if you don't have 64 bits, it's just not going to execute. So we download it, we unzip it, and then I just double click the file with orange icon, click import, and then just wait a little bit for this to be imported. So I skip through that, and here we have a new image for Windows. So I'm going to fiddle with the settings a little bit, because that's actually very important. So I'm going to add some memory to make the VM faster. I'm going to add another processor for the same reason. I'm also going to add additional memory because that's the minimum required to run this VM. And now I want to add a storage device, a disk drive, which I'm going to use to install guest editions, which basically makes the VM more user-friendly. Like, you can maximize the screen and do all sorts of more convenient things. So that's what I just did. And then finally, I'm going to disconnect it from the network, because if I don't, it's going to start downloading updates, and in addition, it might be dangerous if I'm running malware. So you want to keep your VM disconnected unless you have a good reason to keep it connected. And then finally, if I wanted to add a shared folder, then I would use this tab, and I would press this plus button, specify the path, and then mount it. But at the moment, I'm not interested in that. So I'm just going to go on ahead, and now I'm going to run my VM, having configured it. And this takes a bit of time. I'm going to fast forward through that for your viewing pleasure. And in the future, I'm going to create a snapshot which will allow me to skip through it. So remember, the password is capital P, password with an 0 instead of an O and an exclamation mark at the end. Going back to snapshots, basically they allow you to, kind of like the name implies, go back in time. So you create a snapshot, you can make some changes, and then you can revert to that snapshot. And that also means that you can install something once, create a snapshot, and then you can always come back to it. So you don't have to reinstall what you've installed. So next thing I'm going to do is install guest editions. Like I mentioned, it's for convenience. You go up to the options and then you insert a CD with guest editions into this virtual disk drive that we created. And then you install it kind of like an ordinary program. Just click next, 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 next. And I'm going to fast forward through this as well. But I just want to take this opportunity to note that while we are doing all the setting up, nothing prevents us from working with another VM. In other words, the parallelization that I mentioned earlier. So while this is installing and restarting, we could also in parallel be running another VM and doing the same thing there. For instance, if I want to have a Linux machine or a Kali Linux in order to attack another machine. So now we finished installing the guest editions, we started the VM. I'm gonna log back in. Okay, and now I'm going to show you how to use snapshots. So let's say we are at a state that we're happy with. For instance, I don't want to reinstall guest editions, so I want to create a snapshot in case that my device gets destroyed by malware that I detonated and I don't want to reset everything up from the beginning. So I'm going to go up to the options and take a snapshot. Let's call it snapshot 1. This isn't that important, although if you automate things you might want to keep note of the names. And now I'm going to show you, by creating a file, I'm going to show you that you can revert the snapshot and you'll be back to where the snapshot was taken. So go to snapshots, turn off the VM, pick the snapshot we're interested in, restore, and if we want to we can create a new snapshot from the current state, but in this case we don't. And you can see already that it's restoring the snapshot and the file is not there. So that is how you set up a basic virtual lab environment. See you at the next lecture on working with virtual Python environments.